Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Janmadhyasya yato niriyaya
Janmadhyasya yatambayari taratascha te svabhigya swara. Dinne Brahma Hridaya Adhika Vayemo Jantuja Suraya Tejo Varimrida Jata Vinimajo Jatra Trisargo Mrisa Dhamna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyang Paramdimahi. O my Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisance unto you.
The absolute truth.
And meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because the absolute
and
truth.
The primeval cause of all causes.
And the primeval cause of all causes.
Of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes.
For the creation, sustenance, destruction of the manifested universe.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji.
The original living being.
The original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representations.
Of water seen on fire or land seen on water.
Of water seen on fire, of land seen on water.
By him, even the great sages and demigods, only because of him do the material universes.
Only because of him do the material universes.
Temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature.
Temporarily manifested by the reaction of three modes of nature.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
Appear factual, although they are unreal.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna.
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna.
Who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode.
Who is eternally existing in the transcendental abode.
Which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
Which is forever free from the illusory representation of the material world.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute.
Dharma Pujita Kaitavotra.
Dharma Pujita Kaitavotra.
Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam.
Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam.
Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu.
Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu.
Shivadam Tapa Trayon Mulanam.
Shivadam Tapa Trayon Mulanam.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite.
Kim va Parir Ishwaraha.
Kim va Parir Ishwaraha.
Sadyo Hridaya Avuridyate Tra.
Sadyo Hridaya Avuridyate.
Kriti Bihi Sususubhistakshanat.
Kriti Bihi Sususubhistakshanat.
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
Completely rejecting all religious activities from material motivated.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth.
This Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
Which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from an illusion for the welfare of all.
It has to be the reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity.
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva's maturity.
Is sufficient in itself for God realization.
It's sufficient itself for God realization.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other scripture?
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam.
By this culture of knowledge.
By this culture of knowledge.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
The Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam.
Nigama kalpataror
Sukumukad amrita dravya samyutam.
Sukumukad amrita dravya samyutam.
Pibata bhagavatam rasam alayam.
Bhagavatam rasam alayam.
Muhur ahoraska bhuvi bhavukaha.
Muhur ahoraska bhuvi bhavukaha.
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam.
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam.
The mature fruit of the desire to Vedic literatures.
The mature fruit desired for Vedic literatures.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful.
Even though its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
including liberated souls.
Including liberated souls.
Shindvatam Swakata Krishna.
Shindvatam Swakata Krishna.
Punya Shravana Kirtana.
Punya Shravana Kirtana.
Hridyantak Stohi Bhadrani
Hridyantastu Yabhadra
Vidunoti Suhit Satam.
Vidunoti Suritsatam.
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures,
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita,
is itself righteous activity.
it's a righteous activity.
And for one who hears about Krishna,
From who hears about Krishna,
Lord Krishna is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend, and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. Nastapresu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamashloke bhaktir bhavati naistake. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam
as he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavad
and from the devotees,
and from his
he
devotees,
becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord.
he becomes fixed in devotional service to the Lord.
Tadarajastamo bhava
Tadarajastamo bhava
kamalobhadayaschaye
kamalobhadayaschaye
cheta etar anavidam
Chidaiteranabhidam
stitvam sattve prasidati.
Sitam sarve prasidati.
By development of devotional service,
By development of devotional service,
the modes of material lust and avarice are diminished. I'm sorry. One becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance,
one becomes freed from the mode of passion and ignorance,
and thus material lust and avarice are diminished.
and this material lust and avarice are diminished.
Evam prasana manaso
Evam prasanna manas
bhagavad bhakti yogataha
Bhagavad Bhakti Yoga
bhagavad tattva vijnanam
Bhagavad Tattva
tasangasya jayate.
Vijnana.
When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and becomes enlivened by devotional service, and thus, and understands the science of God perfectly.
And they understand the science of God perfectly.
Vidyate hridaya grantis,
Vidyate hridaya grantis,
chidyante sarva samsaya,
Chiyante sarva
siyante chasya karmani,
Chiyante chasya karmani.
drista eva atmanishware. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection
That's the Bhakti Yoga service and hard note.
and enables one to come at once to the stage of samsayam samagran,
Enables to come to one to say this.
understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality of Godhead.
Understanding the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead.
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his
Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna
devotee in Krishna consciousness
from his devotee in Krishna consciousness,
can one understand the science of Krishna.
one understand the science of Krishna.
Srimad Bhagvatam, Canto 2, Chapter 1, text number 18. Niyat chet visaye bhyo ksan
Niyat ched vishayibhyo kyan
manasa buddhisarati
manasa buddhi sarati
manakarma bir akshiptam
mana karma bhi akchitam
subhate darayedya.
subhakti darayedya.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The first process of spiritualizing the mind by mechanical chanting of the pranava omkara and by control of the breathing system is technically called the mystic or yogic process of pranayama, or fully controlling the breathing air. The ultimate state of this pranayama system is to be fixed in trance, technically called samadhi. But experience has proven that even the samadhi stage also fails to control the materially absorbed mind. For example, the great mystic Vishwamrita Muni, even in the stage of samadhi, became a victim of the senses and cohabited with Menaka. History has already recorded this. The mind, although ceasing to think of sensual activities at present, remembers past sensual activities from the subconscious status, and thus disturbs one from 100% engagement in self-realization. Therefore, Sukadeva Goswami recommends the next step of assured policy, namely to fix one's mind in the service of the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead also recommends this direct process in the Bhagavad Gita 6.47. Thus, the mind being spiritually cleansed, one should at once engage himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord by the different devotional activities of hearing, chanting, etc. If performed under proper guidance, that is the surest path of progress even for the disturbed mind. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Now, this is really very precious information. And if we think that, oh, we're hearing the same thing over and over again, this is getting boring, chant Hare Krishna, take prasadam, come to Mangal Arti, and hear the class, and do Tulsi Puja, and take prasadam, etc., etc., and it always comes back to these points. And that's called repetition, and eventually the person will say, oh, this is getting boring. It's the same thing every day. Right? But actually not. There's a tremendous depth of understanding. So today we're going to hear the difference between the traditional meditative process for controlling the mind and how superior the Krishna conscious process is to that, because it's very, very difficult in this age of Kali to attain perfection through the meditation process. And on top of all that, most of the meditators are Mayavadis, which means that even if you attain perfection, it's still imperfect, because they only give knowledge of impersonal Brahman. They don't give knowledge of Goloka and Vrindavan. So therefore, the spiritual world, Vaikuntha and Goloka. So even if you attain perfection, you will fall down anyway, because of incomplete knowledge. And even if you attain perfection in a relative sense, like Vishwamrita Muni, like Subara Muni, and others, great munis, they prove that you still fall down. And even if you go up to the level of bhava in devotional service, it's still possible to fall down. And that proof of that is Bharat Maharaj. So that's how dangerous the uncontrolled mind is, and material attachments, and attachments based on the body, like family, nation, state, ethnicity, and so forth. So, but today we're going to specifically hear about the difference, about the superiority of devotional service over the whole meditative process or yoga process. So we'll start in the 5th chapter, 20th verse, which says, a person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is bewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. And the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, the symptoms of the self-realized person are given herein. The first symptom is that he is not illusioned by the false identification of the body with his true self, meaning his soul. He knows perfectly well that he is not this body, but is the fragmental portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, this first symptom of a person who's, let's say, on a progressive path of devotional service, the majority of people in this world never attain it. That first step, they never attain it. They cannot get over the illusion of bodily identification. And I would say you're running close to 99% of the population of the world that cannot achieve that first step. That's how strong the family attachment is. That's how strong ethnicity is. That's how strong the desire to have sustained sense gratification in the family and relatives and so forth. It's so powerful that people can't even come to the first step of self-realization. And then, secondly, it says, he knows perfectly well that he is not this body, but is the fragmental portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Well, they don't teach you that in school. They don't say that you have a soul that's different than the body, and your soul is the part and parcel of Krishna. In other words, you have an eternal relationship with Krishna that cannot be broken in any way. You can fall into illusion and forget about it or ignore it, but it's your constitutional position. None of that is taught in schools. And kids are denied that knowledge today. And that's why you have so much Varna Shankara, unwanted population of children who are not being trained properly in knowledge. They're being fed ignorance instead of knowledge, and they call the ignorance knowledge. Then it says, the second step, he is therefore not joyful on achieving something, nor does he lament in losing anything which is related to his body. Now that is rather the opposite for everyone. They're joyful when they have some success, and they lament when there's some loss. Do you know anyone that is not disturbed at all by success or failure? No, I don't know anybody like that. They all get upset. They get angry, or they become puffed up. Now, the third symptom of someone who's, let's say, self-realized, in other words, this steadiness of mind is called stira buddhi, or self-intelligence, not being disturbed by joyfulness, or not being joyful in achieving something wonderful, nor lamenting when losing something related to the body. So this stira buddhi means self-intelligence. They're never bewildered by these things. He is therefore never bewildered by mistaking the gross body for the soul, nor does he accept the body as permanent and disregard the existence of the soul. Well, that's number 3. This everyone is most people, even Hindus, they are disregarding the existence of the soul and accepting the body as, and with the hope of making it permanent. This knowledge, knowing that the body is not accepting the body as permanent and understanding that they are an eternal soul, this knowledge elevates him to the station of knowing the complete science of the absolute truth, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. That's number 4. He thus knows his constitutional position perfectly well without falsely trying to become one with the Supreme in all respects. That's number 5. That one eliminates all the Mayavadis. This is called Brahman realization or self-realization. Such steady consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. Well, here we have 5 symptoms of a really self-realized person. This eliminates, number 1 eliminates 99% of people. And when you get to 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's almost 100% of the people are eliminated from being self-realized. It So then text 21 says, such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Well, this pleasure within, I don't know anybody, other than maybe Srila Prabhupada and a few other people, that actually are relishing this pleasure within. The pleasure within is connecting to Paramatma, to Krishna, right? In other words, they're not at all attracted to anything outside. Most people are looking for happiness outside. So they say, oh, we're going on a vacation to Disneyland, you know. So that's outside, right? And to Las Vegas, that's outside, right? Or to Yellowstone Park, that's outside. Or to Mount Rainier, that's outside, right? All these things are outside. No one says, you know, I'm perfectly satisfied in my situation. I'm doing service almost 24 hours a day, and I'm perfectly satisfied by that. No, very few people are perfectly satisfied by doing 24 hours a day service. There are some, and they're exceptional persons. Does that mean that you can't be like that? No, you can be like that. That's why we're hearing this. Because unless you know what is perfection, you won't try for it. Just like if you're a gymnast, like you get some young girl or boy, and starting from maybe age 10 or 12, they're being trained to be a gymnast. Well, this is what happens a lot. I remember I trained to become a gymnastic performer. You know, you have this thing called the horse. You know, it's I don't know. You know what that is? You know, it has two metal things here, and they teach you to do all kinds of things with it. So I was trained like that for some time, and I was thinking about becoming a gymnast. It's a hard training, right? And then you have the jungle bar also, and you know you do all these tremendous movements with your body. It takes a lot of practice, and you'll see in the Olympics, you'll see young girls, young men who've been trained like that. So that's a type of austerity, that intense training. But they can attain perfection, and they watch videos of people who are, you know, top gymnasts, and they study their techniques, and then they have a teacher that tries to teach them to be able to do the same things, or even more, all right? So, and then you have rollers, and you have also the ice skaters that attain a certain type of perfection. And then you have the ballet artists that attain a certain type of perfection. And then you have the musicians, and then you have the artists, and so forth. It all requires intense training. But they're striving for this thing called perfection in their art or their different, you know, what you call, those are anyway, it's a type of exercise or a type of art form. So unless you know what the let's call standard of perfection is, you won't try for it. Say, same thing in the musicians, violinists, classical violinists. They're trying to attain a certain very high level of perfection. Well, it says, such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. But that's the point. It's concentrating on the perfection. What is perfection? Is Lord Krishna himself and pure devotees. Now it quotes Sri Yamunacharya, a great devotee in Krishna consciousness. It doesn't say he is a Sri Vaishnava, although he is. he's one of the top Sri Vaishnavas. He's the guru of Ramanujacharya. He's not an Alvar, but he's right on the level of Alvar. See, but Prabhupada calls him a great devotee in Krishna consciousness. And that's what, this is a fact, that almost all the Alvars and all the great saints amongst the Sri Vaishnavas are devotees of Krishna. Yeah. And it quotes this verse that Sri Vaishnavas contest. They say, oh, Yamunacharya never said this. But he did. And it says, since I have been engaged in transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him. So this is the pleasure within now. Whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought, and my lips curl with distaste. A person in Brahma Yoga or Krishna consciousness is so absorbed in the loving service of the Lord that he loses his taste for material sense pleasure altogether. The highest pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. The whole world is moving under its spell, and a materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. Well, we know that now for sure. We might have been in doubt about it some years ago, but after the Me Too hashtag, we know it's fact, 100% a fact. Every one of these big guys, whether they're movie stars, they're stockbrokers, or they're what do you call that, hedge fund Mongols, they call them hedge fund moguls, right? Or Mongols, or you should call them mongrels. Mongrels is a better word. Mongrel means a dog, right? But anyway, the hedge fund guys and the stock market people and the CEOs, almost all of them are rascals, low class, really scum, and that has been proved now. Many of them, and also the broadcasters, the news broadcasters and things like that, they all lost their jobs and all been disgraced because they've been exploiting women, and usually women who are trying to advance in their career, they've been exploited big time. So, the whole world is moving under its spell, and a materialist cannot work at all without this motivation. But a person engaged in Krishna consciousness can work with greater vigor without sex pleasure, which he or she avoids. That is the test in spiritual realization. Okay, now this is the test. This is what differentiates a genuine devotee from a nonsense. Spiritual realization and sex pleasure go ill together. A Krishna conscious person is not attracted to any kind of sense pleasure due to his being a liberated soul. So now we have the test, the litmus test, as they say. So in the Congress of the United States, in the Senate, when they're voting to approve a Supreme Court judge, the Democrats' litmus test is, does this person support abortion? That's their litmus test, right? If the person doesn't support abortion, then they're going to fight tooth and nail not to let that person get on the Supreme Court, right? That's their litmus test. But the litmus test for going back to Godhead and becoming a genuine devotee is that one is free from the desire for having sex in any of its forms, and there's like seven forms of it. Right? It's not only performing the act; there's thinking about it, planning for it, and wishing, and so forth. Okay, so then the next verse says, of course, Krishna says that he is sex life according to the principles of religion. So being married and having children is not a sin if you follow the prescribed rules and regulations. And the next verse says, an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with the material senses, O son of Kunti. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So then Prabhupada explains, material sense pleasures are due to the contact of the material senses, which are all temporary because the body itself is temporary. A liberated person is not interested in anything which is temporary. Knowing well the joys of transcendental pleasures, how can a liberated soul agree to enjoy false pleasure? Well, okay, this brings up two major points. One is that Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasapyasya param justva nivartate. Unless one has a superior taste, they're not going to give up the lower taste, right? So if you let's say you like to have honey, right? So you buy the Costco honey because it's a little bit cheaper, right? But then you get a special honey that's more expensive, but has nothing to do with the Costco honey. It's much, much more tasty and more fruity and more pleasant to eat than the Costco. And then all of a sudden you say, well, I thought the Costco honey was really good, but now, wow, after I tasted this raw honey, I'm never going to go back to Costco honey, which is a blend of, some honey that comes from Argentina, some honey that comes from Brazil, some honey that comes from China. They mix it all together and make it cheaper, right? And if you've never tasted honey before, you think, oh, the Costco honey is really good. But then when you get the real thing, then you say, my God, I'm never going back to that Costco honey. I don't care how much cheaper it is, you see, because you have a higher taste. So this is what that verse says. Is second chapter, I think it's 41st verse. It says that you cannot give up the lower things. I'm sorry, it's not the 40th verse. You cannot give up the lower thing unless you get the higher taste. That's the second chapter, 59th verse. So that param drustva nivartate is this higher taste. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. So Krishna consciousness is that higher taste of transcendental pleasure as opposed to the temporary, mundane, and often disgusting material pleasure. So then it says, knowing well the joys of transcendental pleasures, how can a liberated soul agree to enjoy false pleasure? In the Padma Purana, it is said, the mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasures from the Absolute Truth, and therefore the Supreme Absolute Truth, the Personality of Godhead, is also known as Rama. Rama means the source of all transcendental pleasures. And in Srimad Bhagvatam 5.5.1, it says, my dear sons, this is Bharat Maharaj, this is the father of Bharat Maharaj speaking. He says, my dear sons, there is no reason, this is Rishabhadev, there's no reason to labor very hard for sense pleasure while in this human form of life. Such pleasures are available to the stool eaters, the hogs. Rather, you should undergo penances in this life by which your existence will be purified, and as a result, you'll be able to enjoy unlimited transcendental bliss. So there's this one Armenian Christian saint. His name was Naragatsi. And he wrote these very long and beautiful poems. And basically, all the poems, one, glorify God, or, in his case, it's Jesus. And secondly, it's full of mea culpas. Mea culpa, this is a Latin term. It means, I am sorry. So, he has a long list of things, saying, I've been a sinner. I'm so sorry, God, or Jesus, that I did this. And it just goes in a long litany of I'm sorries. I'm a sinner. And so here also we see that, my dear sons, there's no reason to labor very hard for sense pleasure while in this human form of life. Such pleasures are available to the stool eaters, the hogs. Rather, you should undergo penances. Now, yesterday we described the difference between a penance and austerity. A penance is voluntarily accepting austerities to atone for sins that you've committed. And austerity is, you haven't committed any sins, right? But you voluntarily restrict yourself from sense gratification in order to focus the mind on Krishna. So there's a difference between the penance, although it looks the same, right? You might end up doing the same thing. But there's a difference, because the penance means you definitely committed some sin somewhere. You acknowledge it, and you're willing to do whatever is necessary to eradicate the reaction of that sin, or diminish the reaction of that sin. So here Rishabhadev is telling his sons, look, you don't have to work hard for sense gratification. Your sense gratification and your suffering is already determined by your previous life, by your karma from the previous life. So you don't, no matter how hard you work, or even if you're the laziest person in the world, you're going to get some sense gratification, and you're going to get some suffering, because that was already predetermined from your previous life. So don't work for those things. Rather, you should undergo penances in this life, because for sure, if you took birth again, you committed sins in your past life, and you're committing sins even in this life unknowingly. So you should undergo penances in this life by which your existence will be purified, and as a result, you'll be able to enjoy unlimited transcendental bliss. So in other words, if you do this, you'll attain unlimited transcendental happiness, as opposed to limited, mundane, and often disgusting sense gratification. Therefore, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by sense pleasures, meaning mundane sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he's entrapped by material miseries. Now, we've gone over this before, but it's important to hear this, because this is a law of nature. This is a law of nature, like the law of gravity, like the laws of thermodynamics, like the Newton's laws of motion. This is also a law of nature. And it says, let's see. Okay, we'll come back to this. Yeah, anyway, it's a law of nature, and there are other laws of nature that we should be aware of. What is another law of nature? Well, this is one law. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he's entrapped by material miseries. There's another law of nature. It's called the survival of fittest and the struggle for existence. So this is actually a law of nature, that the big fish will eat the little fish, that the more intelligent person will exploit the less intelligent person. This is a law of nature. In other words, survival of the fittest and the struggle for existence. No one can avoid this in the material world. We might think that we can avoid it, but it's not possible, because it's a law of nature. And then there's the law of subsistence. That is, the weak are the subsistence for the strong. Again, it's related to survival of the fittest, that the big fish is going to eat the small fish. But above all that is the law of good sense. The law of good sense is that it says that disparity between conditioned souls due to everyone's desire to lord it over the material resources. In other words, the mentality of lording it over material nature is the root cause of conditioned life. So, the law of good sense should tell us, look, I'm not going to be in this rat race anymore of trying to control people, of trying to be number one and everybody else is number two. This whole mentality of lording it over people and material nature is the root cause of conditioned life. Conditioned life means birth, death, old age, and disease, and repetition of it. So these are laws of nature that you cannot escape. However, you cannot escape by any material means, but however, we can escape it if we engage in following Rishabhadev's advice. And that advice is precious. Rather, you should undergo penances in this life by which your existence will be purified, and as a result, you'll be able to enjoy unlimited transcendental bliss. Okay, so then the next verse says, before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. This is really important information. And the purport, Prabhupada says, if one wants to make steady progress on the path of self-realization, he must try to control the forces of the material senses. These are the forces of talk, forces of anger, forces of mind, forces of the stomach, forces of the genitals, and forces of the tongue. Vachravegam, Manasakrodavegam, Jivavegam, Udaraprastavegam. So the vegans, the forces, the urges that push us to eat more, sleep more, have more sense gratification, and so forth, and get angry when we're frustrated in sense gratification, and lusty, and all these things. These are the forces of talk, forces of anger, forces of mind, forces of the stomach, forces of the genital, forces of the tongue. One who is able to control the forces of all these different senses and the mind is called Goswami or Swami. Such Goswamis live strictly controlled lives and forego altogether the forces of the senses. Material desires, when unsatiated, generate anger, and thus the mind, eyes, and chest become agitated. Well, now we know why people get angry. Because they have been frustrated in getting sense gratification in some way or other. So they become like what you would call a time bomb, right? A time bomb. In other words, they fixed the timer so it's going to go off really soon, right? And it's a bomb, like it's an explosion, right? So people who are frustrated in getting sense gratification are a time bomb, just waiting to explode. Just any little thing, as they say, it's the straw that broke the back of the camel. To break the back of a camel, you can't do it with a straw. But if there's been 1,000 or 1,000,000 injuries to the back, then a little straw touches, boom, the camel's back is broken. And the same way, if a person is frustrated day after day in sense gratification, any little thing, one misplaced word, some bodily gesture, that's enough. They'll explode, right? And it's an avalanche of vitriol, as they say. And look this word up, vitriol, vitriol. It's a very good word to know in English. It's an avalanche of vitriol, and there's no mercy. It doesn't stop. It gets worse and worse. And you say anything, it just gets worse. So there are people like that. They're angry. And you can't figure out why they're so angry. Now we know, because they have deep-seated material desires and they're frustrated. Therefore, they're a time bomb waiting to go off. So, material desires, when unsatiated, generate anger, and thus the mind, eyes, and chest become agitated. Therefore, one must practice to control them before one gives up this material body. One who can do this is understood to be self-realized and is thus happy in the state of self-realization. This is what differentiates a devotee from a non-devotee. A devotee is pleased or happy or satisfied by knowledge and realization. Knowledge and realization. So self-realization. This is what makes the devotee happy. And the karmi wants money and sense gratification. So compare the two, knowledge and realization, or money and sense gratification. There's no comparison. One is stool, the second one is stool, and the first one is gold, the gold standard. Not 18 karat or not gold that's mixed with a little bit of other metal to make it cheaper. It's 100% gold, right? So one who can do this is understood to be self-realized and is thus happy in the state of self-realization. It is the duty of the transcendentalist to try strenuously to control desire and anger. Notice the words Prabhupada has chosen, strenuously. That means you're using all your strength to control this anger and desire. But you can control it naturally by getting a higher taste, right? It becomes easy to control because once you taste that natural honey that's never been heated over the temperature of the hive, it's not mixed with anything else except the pure pollen and nectar of honey and by the bees, then you're not going to go back to the lower taste, that mixed Chinese junk, with a little bit of Argentina and Brazil thrown in. It's a bunch of junk. It doesn't compare to the real thing. So then the next verse says, one whose happiness is within. And repeating now, there's such a thing as happiness within and sense gratification without. One whose happiness is within, and by dint of knowledge and realization, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. And Prabhupada explains in the purport, unless one is able to relish happiness from within, right? This is this param drishta, this superior taste. So one who is able to relish happiness from within, unless one is able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from the external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? Superficial happiness means it's very short-lived, and it's not really happiness. It only looks like happiness, but actually it leads to misery. Just like it says, the more one's addicted to material pleasures, the more he's entrapped by material miseries. So it's a superficial thing. It's not the real thing. Such a liberated, and so it says, he can therefore sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahma Bhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back to Godhead, back to home. So now we know what we're aiming for, right? We want, this is what this is the purpose of Krishna consciousness. Savai pum saparo dharma yato bhaktira hoksatre ahaitaki pratihata yayat mash suprasidhati. This is what we want. There's 24 hours a day being able to think of Krishna and relishing it, because he's the source of all opulences. He possesses all opulences in full. So that should be satisfying, shouldn't it? It's more than the artificial stuff. Like you go to Disneyland, somebody's walking around like Mickey Mouse, someone's walking around like Donald Duck, another one's walking around like Dumbo, and it's all superficial. It's not real. Or someone goes to a brothel, and they think that they're going to find love in the brothel. It's all superficial. It's not real. It's all feigned. It's all fake. So we should want the real thing. The real thing is sat, eternal. It's not going to disappear. It's going to only get better and better. That's the nature of the spiritual world. Whereas the material world, the fake world, everything gets worse over time. See? So then the next verse says, those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings. And the highest welfare work is to give someone Krishna consciousness and train them in Krishna consciousness. And who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. So here we have a clear delineation of what it takes to be liberated. You have to be beyond dualities. Should I work here or should I work there? Should I live here or should I live there? Should I stay with this person or leave this person? Should I invest my money in this stock or that stock? Should I buy this car or that car? Should I buy this sauna or that sauna? You know, every day there's these dualities. Should I buy this house or that house? Maybe I'll buy both of them and still not be satisfied, so I'll need a third one, you know. So it's unending, these dualities, right? And as long as we're faced with these dualities, we're confused. And we have, it says dualities that arise from doubts, right? So just like a person has a doubt, oh, I'm not sure I should invest in this stock. Yeah, there's a lot of pluses there, but there's some minuses also. And I'm not really sure, you know. Okay, I'll buy it. So they buy it, you know, and the next day it tanks. Oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have bought that stock, you know. It's all bewildering. It's all confusing, you see. And as long as we are troubled by these dualities based on doubts or that arise from doubts, we can't focus on Krishna. We can't focus on chanting. We can't even chant. I know people that they can't chant. There's so much in anxiety they can't even chant. And we tell them, well, you know, the solution to this is chanting. And I say, I'm not going to be able to do that, you know. That is the solution, by the way. But they usually can't do it. You know, they say, well, I tried it, all right, but it didn't work. You know, I tried it. I chanted 4 rounds yesterday. And it didn't feel any better, you know. So, okay, so then the purport Prabhupada says, only a person who's fully, F-U-L-L-Y, that means completely, in Krishna consciousness, can be said to be engaged in welfare work for all living entities. And talking about welfare work, what is the highest welfare? It's giving Krishna consciousness in the form of prasadam and books and time and sharing and you know, spending time with someone. It can be your own child, it can be your wife or your husband or your relative, you know, but giving them time. It's like someone recently told me that a very dear nephew of theirs died, and they were planning to spend some time. Well, he died before they spent any time with them, right? So if they were planning to do it, that's a good thing, but the person needed it right away. It was an emergency. In the meantime, they died. So these things are like that. You know, we might have good intentions, but unless we can set aside the time to share Krishna consciousness with someone else, this just the intention of, okay, is good, but you have to actually spend time, you know, cultivating someone. So only a person who is fully in Krishna consciousness can be said to be engaged in welfare work for all living entities. When a person is actually in the knowledge that Krishna is the fountainhead of everything, then when he acts in that spirit, he acts for everyone. The sufferings of humanity are due to forgetfulness of Krishna as the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend. Therefore, to act to revive this consciousness within the entire human society is the highest welfare work. One cannot be engaged in such first-class welfare work without being liberated in the Supreme. In other words, you have to be liberated to be able to do this welfare work. A Krishna-conscious person has no doubts about the supremacy of Krishna. He has no doubt because he's completely freed from all sins. This is the state of divine love. In other words, when you're free of all sins and you have no doubts about Krishna, this is a state of divine love because you're going to dedicate everything for the pleasure of Krishna. A person engaged only in ministering to the physical welfare of human society cannot factually help anyone. Temporary relief of the external body and the mind is not satisfactory. Well, this eliminates all the psychologists, all the, how you can, all the charity people, how you can be successful guys, the ones that are giving all the seminars on how to get over stress. Everybody goes to Microsoft and gives a lecture, even our own devotees, on how to get over stress, as if that's the biggest problem in the world, right? And as if they're experts, So this is going on, and people are being fooled by it. The real cause of one's difficulties in the hard struggle for existence. Now, again, we spoke about that just earlier, the survival of the fittest, the struggle for existence. This is the law of nature. You're in the material world. This is what's going to happen to us. And there's no way we can get out of it materially. So, temporary relief. The real cause of one's difficulties in the hard struggle for life may be found in one's forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord. When a man is fully conscious of his relationship with Krishna, he is actually a liberated soul, although he may be in the material tabernacle. Tabernacle is a big word, it's a biblical word, but it means the place where you spend time, right? And the original meaning is it's the temple, the tabernacle, or it can also refer to the body where you're spending a lot of time. Okay, well, we'll stop right there and continue tomorrow. We'll continue for the next couple of days on this subject because it's a very important subject for us to learn. And here, we have to know what we're aiming for. We're not aiming to go to the heavenly planets. We're not aiming to do rituals for material benefit. That's not the aim. We're going way, way above that. That's where Lord Chaitanya is taking us. That's where Prabhupada is taking us. That's where the Acharyas take us. Way, way beyond that. That is insignificant compared to where we're going or where we should go. Okay, we'll stop there. Are there any questions? So we'll hear specifically tomorrow about the difference between the yoga system, the physical yoga system, the meditative system, all that stuff, and Krishna consciousness. And you'll see there's no comparison. And the yoga system is very difficult. Very few people, hardly anyone can attain success by it. But Krishna conscious system, everyone can attain success if they just apply themselves by staying in good association. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hari Bol. So we'll go over the homework tomorrow. Yeah. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Vandamui Savadana Mate Janara prasadeva emavatoriya jai. Krishna Prapti Oya Hoite.
Krishna Prapti Oya Hoite.
Guru Mukha Padma Vaitya Chitete Koriya Kya. Arana Koriya Mane Asa. Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati.
Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati.
Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa. Chapsudan dilaje janme janme Prabhu se.
Chapsudan dilaje janme janme Prabhu se.
Divya Gyan Hriday Prakasito.
Divya Gyan Hriday Prakasito.
Prema Bhakti Jaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate.
Bhakti Jaha Avidya Vinasajate.
Vede Gajjanara Charito. Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu. Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu.
Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu.
Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu.
Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu.
Lokanath Lokera Jivana. Lokanath Lokera Jivana. Lokanath Lokera Jivana. Ha Prabhu Korodaya Teha More Padachaya.
Prabhu Korodaya Deha More Padachaya.
Ha Prabhu Korodaya Deha More Padachaya.
Prabhu Korodaya Deha More Padachaya.
Ha Prabhu Korodaya Deha More Padachaya.
Prabhu Korodaya Deha More Padachaya.
Ebeas Kusakchibhumana. Vyasa Kusakti Bhuvana Vyasa Kusakti Bhuvana Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya
Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada,
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada Patita Pavani Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararada Jigachasta Tarasatara Shri Shrimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Yamuna Maya Ki Jai. Jamuna Maya Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhuti Smadhamukta Swanta Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Nirvisesa Sunyavad Paskati Satana. Jai Srila Prabhupada. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of suffering and attain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection of the fields of his heart. It opens my dark eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, built up to birth. From him excited grand emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of standards. I speak to Master, the ocean of mercy, friendly to poor Lord and Master of the devotees. So Master, be merciful unto us, give us share of your lotus feet. Your fame spread all over the world. We take shelter